The rest are digitally locked out of sight and out of mind. Industrial espionage.
Starbreeze Studios are primarily known for their work on the Chronicles of Riddick games, a series that arguably does a better job dealing with the Riddick character and telling better stories than the actual films did. But I think few people really know about their 2012 title Syndicate, an FPS reboot of the RTS game of the same name, which was originally released on PC way back in 1993. Now, whilst the original might have been a success, the reboot was a bit of a failure. In fact, it was a spectacular failure. It got blasted by critics and gamers, and it didn't even get released in Australia because it was deemed too violent, which probably didn't help its reception either. Now, I was gifted this game on Origin by a fan a few months back, and I'm only just getting around to checking it out. And look, I really apologise for not remembering the name of the person who sent it to me, but whoever you are, Sonny Jim, this review is for you. So Syndicate takes place in the year 2069, where a neural implant known as the Dart chip has made all other electronic devices pretty much redundant, as everyone's now able to access the super high-tech dataverse for any kind of information they could possibly need. Imagine having Facebook, Twitter, Gmail and YouTube all embedded into your head, and you get the idea. Your character is Miles Kilo, an agent for the EuroCorp Syndicate, who's basically a hitman with what appears to be a license to kill, mostly just to defend EuroCorp from rival companies and protect their interests. It's a bit of a shame though the story doesn't really explore the state of the world or the effects the Dart chip has had on any kind of large scale. In fact, all the story really does is focus around a few key characters, mostly Milo and a few other EuroCorp employees, Lily, Jules and the CEO, Jack Denham. Delving into the history of EuroCorp and how it affects Kilo is about as deep as the whole thing goes, with a conspiracy story eventually coming up that centers around betrayal and corruption. But it's mostly just pretty much skin deep. It's like a watered down Deus Ex. But at least it's voice acted well. Syndicate features the voice talents of Rosario Dawson as Lily. For Jack Denham, you've got Brian Cox, who's great in pretty much everything he's ever done.
Still waiting for the numbers you promised. Something you're not telling me?
Sorry, I should have something by the end of the day.
Good man.
And Michael Wincott, who plays Jules, who I only ever saw in The Crow and Alien Resurrection. But he fits right in place here as another badass agent that's working for EuroCorp. All in all though, the story is pretty damn weak, and you only ever get glimpses at this larger expansive world before you're pulled right back into your own little hill of beans surrounding Miles and Rosario's character, Lily Drawl. And when you put all that story aside, all you're left with is just a pretty basic first-person shooter.
Jesus!
Now, before I ever knew what Syndicate was about, all I'd heard was that this game has the most amount of bloom that's ever in an FPS game. And after playing through the whole thing, I have to say that I kind of agree. I understand it's been done to make the game stylistic, and a lot of games from around that same time period use bloom to kind of cover up the crappy looking textures and bad modeling. But the thing is that Syndicate looks pretty good artistically, and if anything, the bloom is a hindrance, because you don't get to appreciate the time and effort that's gone into making this game world come to life. At times, the bloom combined with the other visual effects actually had me feeling kind of nauseated, to the point that I had to look away from the monitor for a second or two to regain my equilibrium. But it's the gameplay though where the shit really starts to hit the fan, and look, truth be told though, the first hour or so of the game, things go pretty well, and you start to wonder why this thing got such a negative reception, and then you play for like another hour or so and it all starts to make sense. The shooting in Syndicate, I'm not sure I'd say it's bad, it just feels tedious and just kind of generic. Combat almost entirely revolves around this dart chip mechanic, dart standing for damage, armor, and reaction time, which to put it in gamer terms is basically bullet time that gives you increased resistance to damage and increased damage output. Now it's never really explained how that actually works, but look, let's just roll with it, shall we? Now dart mode's going to run out if you use it too much, but during this period, enemies and nearby objects are going to be highlighted to make you more aware of your surroundings during combat. More importantly though, seeing as everyone in the game has a dart chip in their head as well, this gives Kilo the ability to kind of hack into them and create some pretty nasty side effects. One ability for instance is called Suicide and lets you literally cause someone to drop their weapon and commit suicide, resulting in their goddamn head exploding, even damaging nearby enemies. Another one's called Backfire, and it causes an enemy's weapon to, well, backfire, damaging them and again, nearby enemies. Then lastly, there's Persuade, which will get an enemy to fight on your side for a short period of time, attacking their former allies before committing suicide. Ignoring the fact that you're able to do this to people in the first place, which is just a huge glaring security oversight on the people who created the dart chip, it also just gets kind of boring really quickly, considering you're going to be doing it like a couple of dozen times per level. I mean, it's impressive and cool initially, but it loses that appeal pretty soon after. You'll fight other agents during the campaign that serve as mini boss fights, and some of these can create decoys, or they can cloak, or just run around and jump super quickly. And yet our poor protagonist Kilo is limited to 3 measly abilities, 2 of which end with your target taking their own life. Like I said before, it's a watered down Deus Ex. Would have at least been cool though if after fighting these bosses you could somehow take their abilities as well. You do after all violently remove the dart chip from their bloodied and beaten corpse after beating them, so it would make sense that their skills would be stored on that chip. But that's not the worst part. The worst part comes from when you're taking on some of the tougher enemies who are often thrown in with large groups of the weaker, more basic enemy types. Now these guys usually have a heavy resistance to damage and will require their shields or armor to be hacked firstly, before you can even begin to inflict any kind of damage in the first place. Even outside of these tank type enemies, most of the shooting just feels monotonous. I lost count of the amount of times I stopped shooting at someone because I shot them in the head and thought they were dead, only to see them get back right up again and just keep on firing. Now I know they're supposed to be wearing body armor, but emptying half an assault rifle magazine into someone's head and having them still get back to their feet is just bullshit. Syndicate is the same style of shooting we've seen in the Chronicles of Riddick games and The Darkness, where the player's arms and legs are visible at all times and taken into account. So if you look down, you're going to see your own feet. And if you walk up to a wall, your weapon is raised upwards instead of magically passing through it. Now look, I dig this, I really do. It creates a sense of immersion and is better than looking down and just seeing nothing. What this means though is that the extensions of your character isn't really always what you're going to see on screen. So when you think you're hidden in cover, for instance, you're probably often not, because the game takes more into account than just what you can see on the screen. Also, when making sharp turns or sudden movements, there's almost like a slight delay where the animation has to compensate and adjust your torso or legs to rotate as required. As a result of all this, everything just feels kind of stilted and awkward. At least the weapons are kinda cool though. I like the way the weapons all have these little holographic displays that show your ammunition, and some of them are really creative in design too, like a gun that can lock onto enemies and fire homing projectiles. Then there's a few times when you're given a minigun with unlimited ammo, and these moments are just incredibly awesome as you'll tear droves of enemies to literal pieces. The shotgun is criminally underpowered though and takes a dog's age to reload, which is a bit of a letdown, considering how important a good shotgun in an FPS game should be, but overall it's actually a pretty cool weapon lineup. As I said before, Syndicate was also originally banned in Australia at the time of its release. Now I'm not entirely sure why that is. It might be the fact that the game gives you the freedom to execute civilians with the press of a button, not that you're ever really required to. Also maybe Kilo's ability to cause enemies to commit suicide or other certain aspects of the subject matter were probably deemed too dark. Earning upgrades, for instance, as I said before, is achieved by shoving this device into someone's skull and forcibly pulling an upgrade component out of their head, which kills them in the process. Nothing that I would say really justifies banning the game outright though, considering The Darkness 2 also came out the same year. And that game lets you execute people by pulling their entire spinal column out of their goddamn asshole. And also the classifications board banned Syndicate, but they kept letting Guy Sebastian make music, so they clearly don't know what the hell they're doing. But anyway, the game failed, and because of the overall failure, it said that the ensuing result is what split Starbreeze Studios up into Machine Games, which was a good thing because it let them go off and eventually work on Wolfenstein The New Order and The Old Blood, but it's also a bad thing, because they'd also eventually work on Wolfenstein 2 The New Colossus. I think part of what made Syndicate so unsuccessful was that it really didn't achieve anything all that new or groundbreaking. Deus Ex Human Revolution was released a mere year prior, and it dealt with the sci-fi and cyberpunk theme better than Syndicate ever could. Not to mention it offered up more gameplay options than you could poke a stick at. The other thing is that whilst the original Syndicate isn't a bad game, it's not like it's really any kind of masterpiece. I mean, sure, it's still playable, but it's very much a product of its time, and the people who will tell you how amazing it is are most likely the same people who played it way back in 1993. Also, if they're trying to draw in the original fans, what they're really doing is just alienating them by making a complete genre shift and turning it into a pretty standard FPS. Copies of the game for PC are about as rare as good songs written by Guy Sebastian, so if you really want to check it out, you're probably going to have to pick it up for the PS3 or the Xbox 360. And if you've ever wanted to play a game that lets you force countless amounts of people to end their own lives, well, this is the game for you.